Hi, John McCarty here with Odyssey Test Prep. I'm joined by John, one of our tutors, and he specializes in the LSAT. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and what's got you into LSAT tutoring.
Yeah, of course. So, hi guys, I'm John. I graduated from Northwestern University with a dual degree in biology and psychology. But I will say I have just had a lot of experience teaching. So, I'm the oldest of my siblings, the oldest among the cousins. So, definitely had a lot of experience tutoring. And my family is from all over the place. So, we have family in Canada, we have family in Latin America, Asia. So, it's a lot of cross cultural tutoring as well. So,
Hmm.
balancing languages and um, just always, I guess, having that mentorship role as I was growing up. And that continued through high school clubs, university internships. Um, had an internship where I was at a soccer academy where it was half soccer skills and half academia. And I'm by no means a soccer player, so I handled the academia portion. So shortly after graduating, I um, taught for a year, and that was mostly within standardized testing, like creating curriculums for like, high school students as well.
Mm.
Um, but since I was very, I guess, comfortable with teaching, I did want to branch out a bit. So I think a year or so after teaching, I got into tech. So got some experience there working within um, SaaS companies, analyzing VC, then moving into healthcare. But I think law has always been something at the back of my head. So um, it's been quite a process in my engaging with that path, but also in helping others on that path through my background teaching. It's quite long winded.
Yeah, no, that's great background. Um, and I talk to a lot of students or potential people who are studying for the LSAT, and coming from all sorts of different angles and different paths that have gotten them there. And sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm 25. I'm getting so old. I got to get this thing started."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we have people coming in when they're in their 30s. We've even had people in their who are retiring, and they want to then just pursue law at that point in their lives. So it's always cool to hear people's different paths coming to law and into law school and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, so tell us about your LSAT prep journey. Like, what did that look like? Where did what was your starting position? How long did it take you? And where did you end up?
Yeah. I think this is a great question because, like you said, it really is a journey. And I think when you talk to people, um, it's very easy to forget that we all start at one point, but a test is very, very learnable. And it's a lot of, I think it helps with personal growth as well because you're going to face a lot of challenges and how you adjust really, um, helps set the stage where this is just the first of um, many things that we'll have to go through. So it's definitely a journey. So I would
Yeah.
say I started maybe a couple years after undergrad. So maybe when I was in that first tech role, um, I think I always thought I was a science person, but I very quickly realized I'm much more towards the humanities. So I did think about law for some time, and I was interested talking to lawyers, etc., learning more about the space.
Hmm.
But as for LSAT training, I think I took a test blind to start, and I was in that like mid 150s, so it definitely didn't come natural.
Hmm.
Um, and that's perfectly okay. There's definitely a sort of mindset and skill set that needs to be developed in approaching LSAT. And at first, I wasn't really sure what to do. I just got like Kaplan, Princeton Review, just started going through that, and um, it was kind of not too productive because I think I would just study here and there.
Mm.
And I think once I started looking at what are other options in the market, I found some better options to kind of take my studying to the next level. Um, and from there, I think there was a point where I started to study a little bit more with intention. And that's where I was in the mid 160s, plateau there, come back and changing up the system, start working with study buddies. And that was the final push to the 170s, mid 170s.
Great. Yeah. And, I think a lot of people go through a similar, kind of steps as they're going through, grab a couple of books, whatever's lying around. Maybe a friend gives them to them. They grab them online and they go through those. They get familiar with the test. The score goes up a little bit, but they're not really like dedicated into the process yet.
Exactly.
And really kind of dedicating yourself to that journey and being like, all right, this is the number one thing that I'm doing in my whole life right now is studying for the LSAT, and putting it in that primary position can really yield better results. But how did it feel once you hit that 165 plateau? Because I hit a similar plateau, and mine was like a 168 kind of plateau, so very similar. It felt like unbeatable for a little while for me. How about for you?
That was definitely my experience too, because I think once I got to, it was like 166 to 168, it was just constantly within that range. And I think that was a big turning point because, when you feel stuck, it's like, all right, how will I react? How can I analyze like the current like studying system I have? What are the types of mistakes I'm doing? And I think through tutoring a lot of students, I found that what I perceive to do is something quite common for, I guess a common pitfall where I think during that time I thought, okay, I just need to do more practice. So I really focus on cranking out problem sets, practice tests, and the the value in doing this practice is in the review. So it's not just how many practice tests can you crank out if you're constantly doing like suboptimal strategies that lead you to a certain range. So I think at that point it was a lot of mental toughness and coming back to revisit the system. But it's definitely was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that a lot of people come to us when they hit that plateau and they're like, all right, I'm stuck. I don't know, I can't find a new angle on this thing, but I still need 10 more points to get to, where I want to be. And I do think getting outside perspectives can be super helpful. Now, you had mentioned that you did a study group. So give us some insight into that. So, because some people may be like, all right, one-on-one tutoring, maybe they can't find a good option in their area, or they don't want to do online, or they're just more comfortable working with people they know. Tell us about your experience there.
Yeah. So I think one of the most valuable things, not just in LSAT, but in, I think, learning something is there's so much that one learns by explaining it to others or having a conversation and engaging with it. Because like you said, that outside perspective helps, one person's understanding. And that just, I guess, that give and take really usually facilitates growth. So I know that was definitely the case for LSAT for me, where, I was really just plateauing in the mid to high 160s, starting to get frustrated, what should I do? And I started to, there's a bunch of forums online, but I wrote like, hey guys, this is my profile. I'm averaging within this range. These are some like average scores. Like if there's anyone like with a similar goal to me and within this range that wants to link up, let me know. So I had study buddies. So I was in the Midwest at the time. So I was in Ohio and I had study buddy. I had one study buddy, two study buddies in Michigan, and one study buddy in South Korea. So
wow,
I think it's definitely a wonderful system because it creates accountability, and it's a lot easier to convince yourself, oh yeah, I understand this. But when you have to explain to someone else and they challenge you, I think that's where you get a ton of growth.
I think that is phenomenal, right? Like being able to do it, your understanding is like here, but being able to explain how you did it exactly, your understanding goes like way, way, way up.
Exactly.
And I also, I've done it. I know I've done it. And I know I see students do it now too, where you, you convince yourself, you kind of lie to yourself a little bit like, oh yeah,
Of
I get
course.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
100%.
yeah, but even when you don't, but like the most important thing is in those moments is to make sure you go back into that content, that thing that
Yeah,
you didn't really 100% get,
yeah,
and get to 100% understanding. Because once you get to 100% understanding, all of a sudden it becomes super clear and you're
yes,
like, oh, okay, I see this now. Versus like, I think I might be able to do this again in the future if I saw it again, but I'm not really sure the mechanisms that are going on, behind the scene.
yeah. And one thing I'll piggyback off that is it's interesting because I think what really helped me take, like, everyone's going to be at different stages of their journey. But let's say if you're in the 160s trying to break into the 170s, I think one thing that really helped me, and one thing that I was telling my students recently, is that um, in having that study buddy or in having that tutor where you engage with the material, you're explaining your perspective, um, a lot of times it's kind of crazy how much time you could just spend on one, two, just a handful of questions where you're really breaking them down by,
Yeah.
what are the components of the answer choice, or like what are the implications of this. And that I think becomes a lot easier when you're having a conversation with someone. Whereas
Yes.
sometimes when you're by yourself, your brain just kind of gets fried. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely
And
agree.
having someone challenging and
Yes.
even just probing, even if they're not challenging, if they're just
Yeah.
like, okay, well, why did you decide to go back up and look at that part of the stimulus to begin with? Or what got you back into the third paragraph on this reading comp? How did you
Exactly.
know to go back there? And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I never really thought about how am I doing this stuff? Well, I got back there because I did this other thing and I had set it up by doing this. And so you can start to even understand your own process as to how
Exactly.
you're doing things. Um,
And the own assumptions that you made, perhaps, or
right.
it's, oh, I didn't even notice I was doing that. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then also somebody else can usually see the patterns that you're doing better than you can,
Definitely.
right?
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, like if your reading isn't super precise and you're like mixing it, you're going for strong language in areas, where you shouldn't be, and answer choices are like on a must be true question. If you keep going from
Yeah.
many to most or from most to all or something like that, somebody else
Yeah.
will be able to see that so much quicker and easier than you.
Yeah. This is the third question where exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so hard to like fix your own mistakes because
Yeah.
you're the person making them. If you already knew how to fix them, you would have already done that and you wouldn't be making the mistake, right?
Yeah.
So like that's where getting like a little bit of help from somebody else. And I thought, I mean, the way that you went about that is also super interesting to me because sometimes people will say, well, I don't even know anybody else who's studying for the LSAT. Like I have nobody to turn to. I'm the first person in my family to want to go to law school and go down this path. And I don't know anybody else. You took the initiative to like, all right, well, I guess I don't know anybody in my local area, but I'm going to jump onto one of the forums and say, hey, I'm scoring here. Does anybody want to get together and do it? And
Across the world, and yeah,
yeah,
there's so many people um, that can, just help you with your journey, and vice versa.
yeah. And so I guess with the forums as well, have you found, I mean, I found a lot of times people can lose themselves in the forum and they use that as like a pretend being productive. Like I'm going to do some research on this
100%.
thing and then while I was in
Yeah.
the forums. Where did you find value in the forums and where didn't you find value?
Yeah. I think that's a great question because that's such an important distinction between, like studying that's, kind of like garbage studying, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing the work, versus like very intentional studying. So I think the important thing is I would oftentimes see forums like people like asking like questions as in, kind of like airy and like not to a particular objective.
Hmm.
Like, oh, guys, do you think, like, what do you think of this? Or, um, I don't know. I think there's different kinds of ways you can engage with the forums, but I think one thing that was helpful for me, both when I was studying with others or studying by myself, is um, making sure it comes back to a particular objective. So, for example, I found certain forums that I liked for answer explanations, and I had, these are my two top tier resources. I'm going to go through the answers, and sometimes I would also explain things to other people, and that would help me.
Hmm.
But I think just um, catching yourself where you're um, doing something that at the end of the day is helping your overall objective and not just kind of getting lost.
Yeah. and I know I've done both, but like when I was studying, I was I tried to be tactical when I went to the forums. Like I'm trying to figure out like what's the best self-study book, and like going in there and like searching the forum and not even really engaging too much with it. Just like, all right, what are people saying? Just kind of like get a list together and get,
Synthesizing. Yeah.
yeah. And then anytime I found myself like just going through and like listening to people's stories of what, and just like scrolling and reading just anything, it was never productive. Like it never impacted my score. It was
Yeah.
always, just a waste of time when I was doing stuff like that. But it sounds like you found some good value and you were able to be tactical for the most part in the way that you utilized them.
Yeah. Because I think definitely so much, right, John, is it's just based on context. So I think a lot of times we want to um, emulate what other people do, but our best thing is perhaps in just picking and choosing things that work best to our particular context. So whether that be advice and just again trying to go for a value add perspective in our toolbox during this stage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always advise students not to spend too much time in the forums, especially if they do. Once you get like a group of trusted advisors, I find that to be much more effective because there's a lot
Yes.
less toxicity usually.
Less
And,
noise.
yeah, less noise.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that idea of like junk studying and, even when people sometimes will sit down to LSAT content and do just like a ton of questions, no review, see how many they got right or got wrong, and then that's the end of it. And I would consider that to be maybe not completely junk, but pretty low quality
Exactly.
studying. Walk me through kind of your process of, let's say you were going to sit down and study for an hour,
Mhm.
and you're still like in the content learning phase of things. What might that look like for you?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. That's something I really try to uh, bring up to my students where there's a quality of studying and we want to make sure that our studying is a little bit on the higher end. And you touched on it, there's a lot of different factors that play into that. So one thing I always tell students is um, there's so many hours in a day, make sure you give your best hour, your best whatever set of time that you have for studying to the LSAT. It's so difficult, and everyone has different kinds of perspectives, right? Where some people like to study in the morning. It's like, okay, let's study in the morning. Some people like to study at night.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would say control the context in a way that facilitates higher quality studying. So for example, for me, I definitely found that in university, my work, etc., I'm much more productive in the morning. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if I add on exercise or, going outside first, completing something, then coming back to studying, then my productivity is even better. So I think controlling for those factors where you can be at your best, maybe you're normally at like 60 or 70%, but after I control for certain factors, I'm 90%. I'm able to more lock in. So I would say like one, control context. I think
Yeah.
two,
If I
um,
can piggyback on that for a second,
yeah,
and I think it's really important that people know themselves and that they control the context for them personally,
yes,
right? So
yes,
like if I tried to get up and study in the morning, it would be a disaster. Like I am so unproductive for the first
yeah,
few hours of my day, but like in the evenings, once everyone goes to sleep, I can like focus in and I can get my stuff done, and that's when I studied.
yeah,
So I just want to make sure that people feel empowered to like, it's not like get up at 5 a.m. and that's the solution for everybody. It's like
yeah,
know yourself and find your windows
yes.
and do it then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always tell sometimes I feel like we always want to just copy what other people do, but it is kind of experimenting where, what and do I study better in public, in a particular room, like hungry, not like all these little soft things that you could
Yeah.
experiment. Um, but to touch back on your earlier question, I think a very important thing is um, in intentional studying is trying to have like an overarching objective where it's, let's say I'm still accumulating kind of a foundational knowledge. It's like, okay, I'm going to, approach sufficient assumption. I'm going to blind review it as in let's say I do a problem set, and after I do it in time conditions, I go back and would I change any of these answers, and I start to grapple with that again. And after I have my initial time conditions, I had my blind review. I look over the questions, see if I would change anything. Then I have the answer explanation. So it's structured, it's towards a particular point, and again, just bringing context. I know when my battery's going down a little bit, it's like, all right, let me like stretch a little bit, go for a walk, come back, and what's our objective for this session.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being, really wise with your time and being focused. And I know that was how I studied. Like when I sat down, I was like, I'm learning must be true questions today. Like, and I'm going to learn everything about what must be true questions are. I'm going to pick them apart. I'm going to do a bunch of them. I'm going to just like really look at it from all these different angles. I'm going to, and just like that is my objective for this day of studying. And then I would move on to something else and just being really focused on what you need to do. And it doesn't always need to be a small thing that you're focused on. Sometimes you're focused on, today I'm trying to put together a logical reasoning section. I want my section to be perfect. I want the way that I go through it to be great. And then you're analyzing. You're like, well, I stayed on question 5 too long, and I did this, and and these are the things I need to correct. And then you make those corrections, and then you get in and try it again.
I really like what you said, John, where it doesn't have to be like, one day must be true, next day sufficient assumption. I think the main key in this is being intentional, so that when you have the time, it's like, I'm going to stretch the time as best as I can, because I'm working towards a particular thing, not the whole elephant of 175, but within my particular space. I feel like it helps students kind of lock in to make that time more productive.
Yeah, and I found that sometimes if you focus on the number too much, you prevent yourself from getting there the easiest path possible. Because like wanting the number does nothing for you to getting it. The thing is the tactical things, the strategy that you're putting into place around the exam and then doing the work is what's going to get you there. So focus on the work and don't focus so much on the number. The number will take care of itself if you get the work done.
And one thing I just want to piggyback off that, John, is I think one of the best things I've ever heard in during this process that helped me, and I think has helped a lot of my students, is exactly like you said, don't get obsessed with numbers and see your practice as a range of scores. And within that moving average, you have your worst days, you have your best days, but you're not looking at what the particular number is, but you're looking to take this moving average and move it a little bit closer to the upper ranges. So, it's not going to be completely linear, but as long as you have that trajectory, I think that also helps students kind of ease a little bit, because they'll be, oh, John, my score went down by 2 points. But I said, let's look at, what happened during the test and not fixate on the numbers.
Right. Yeah. And I've never heard of anybody doing it in a linear path where the score went up every single time they took a practice test to the top.
Definitely not.
So it's good for people to have that expectation going in. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. And, the downs are just as much an opportunity to learn as the ups are. So,
yeah.
And that's how I view practice, is like, this is an opportunity to learn. I'm not going to be perfect because I'm still practicing, right? Yes. But where it hurts the most, that's where I can learn the most.
Exactly.
All right, John. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved everything that you said. I think you've given people a really cool perspective on ways to really be gritty with the test and how to approach it in an intentional way, and how to find your, group of advisors, even if it doesn't seem super easy, but there are ways to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. Best of luck to everyone. And yeah.
All right.
John, good to talk
Thank
to
you, John.